The birth of the Ocoee in Tennessee. The Ocoee River starts in the mountains of northeast Georgia and Chattahoochee National Forest. Its first impoundment is Blue Ridge Lake near Morganton, Georgia. Construction on the Blue Ridge Dam began in 1925 and was completed 5 years later. It is 167 feet high and 1,000 feet across. It isn't really the Ocoee River here. Its official name is Ocoee River. Below this earthen dam lie the townships of McCaysville, Georgia, and Copper Hill, Tennessee. The Ocoee then flows into the Cherokee National Forest, where it is impounded by Tennessee Valley Authority's No. 3 Dam. Ocoee Dam No. 3 began in 1941 and was completed in 1942. It is a small lake of 360 surface acres. The dam is 110 feet high and 612 feet across. The water is diverted through an underground pipeline for several miles. It emerges at Ocoee No. 3 hydroelectric power plant on Highway 64 in Polk County, Tennessee. The Ocoee then flows several miles downstream to the diversion dam. This structure was originally built by East Tennessee Power Company in 1913 and is only 30 feet high and 450 feet across. This small structure diverts the water into a 4.7-mile-long flume, at the end of which lies the historical Ocoee No. 2 hydroelectric plant. This section of the river is also very popular with whitewater rafting enthusiasts. From No. 2, it flows into Lake Ocoee, now known as Parksville Lake. No. 1 Dam and hydroelectric plant is in the community known as Parksville. The dam itself lies just as the Ocoee emerges from the Appalachian Mountains. All the Ocoees were designed for hydroelectric power. Construction began by the East Tennessee Power Company in 1910 and completed in 1911. The lake is 1,930 surface acres with 109 miles of shoreline developed for recreation. The dam is 135 feet high and 840 feet across. From No. 1, the Ocoee flows east and northward for several miles before feeding into the Hiwassee River, which in turn feeds into the Tennessee River and thus the Mississippi River. Many rivers which head up in the Appalachian Mountains into the Mississippi Basin have been known to flow northward for many miles before turning eastward towards the Big Muddy. At the foot of the Appalachian Mountains, as the Ocoee River made its peaceful way down the valley, lay the community of Parksville, Tennessee. It was a relatively new community, not even incorporated. In the community lived the Parks family along with the Reimers, Fotts, Orrs, McClarys, Copelands, Boyds, Brocks, Elrods, and Fitzers, along with a few others. Electricity was becoming more in demand. Electric light and streetcars were needed. Refrigerators, cook stoves, and wringer washers were the modern conveniences that came later on, especially after the Reimers began a new manufacturing company that built ranges. The Eastern Tennessee Power Company was formed by a man named Clark, who had come to Chattanooga, purchased the lightning and railroad companies, then the Parksville properties. As early as 1810, Congress had seen the feasibility of damming the Ocoee between the Sugar and Bean Mountains. Congress wanted to set up a series of locks and dams between the Ocoee and the Conasauga rivers. The Conasauga River lay just a few miles south and ran into a completely different watershed. Where the Ocoee was a part of the Mississippi River watershed, the Conasauga flowed south into the Chattahoochee and eventually into the Atlantic. The waterway between two rivers would have made movement of cargo much simpler. A trial shipment of whiskey was conducted, but the whiskey was lost in transit. Congress officially stated that they could not get right-of-way from the Cherokee. Many say this might not be factual. In 1910, the J.G. White Construction Company began work on the dam. A camp for the work sprang up in the nearby area. Newspapers described the area as decidedly roomy, cozy, and substantial. The health conditions were described as splendid, with water and sewer lines everywhere. 1,200 laborers were employed. To house and accommodate these employees was Hopkins Inn and 4 other permanent buildings, 2 white sleeping quarters, 20 cottages for married foremen, a bathhouse, 2 mess houses, 2 engineering quarters, a bunkhouse, 12 buildings for Italian quarters, a boiler house, and a commissary. The shops included electric, machine rigging, and carpenters. Other buildings included a storeroom, a cement house, a mixer, a boiler house, stable, and a bakery. There were quarters for everyone. An interesting story sprang up concerning the Hungarian workers. They were reputed to be the best workers with a shovel. They used to do most of the cement mixing. One afternoon, a new foreman told these Hungarian fellows that he was going to cut their pay from 20 cents an hour to 10 cents an hour because he thought the job was worth half of what they were getting paid. Well, sir, they didn't say a word. They left work at the end of the day, took their shovels with them, and went by the blacksmith's shop. Next day, they showed up with their shovels cut in half. Foreman went back to paying them 20 cents an hour. Park Mills was moved into the village to be used. The camps in Cofer Dam were under construction at the same time. The framework was large timbers and boughs of evergreens were laid to help hold back the banks of dirt. A track was laid around the top so that dirt cars could side dump dirt into the dam, and a steam line was laid to operate the steam equipment. Stiff-leg derricks was used to get the framework up before they started pouring cement in July 1911. It was called the Solid Concrete Parksville Dam because so much concrete was used the quarry was kept going all day and all night. It was located on the north side of the river. Limestone was used in the beginning, but since it was too coarse, it left voids in the concrete. They began using river sand at that time. The concrete mixer was over 20 feet high and was next door to the cement house, which held 50 cement cars. Surrounding the limestone in the structure was then called cyclopean structure. One of the darkest days on the job was the day they found a big hole which turned out to be a cave. The Cofer dams were up and they were pouring the cement into large dam frames when the cave was found. The men were all so dedicated at trying to keep costs at or below $1 million. It took a great deal of cement. During April 1911, 17,000 cubic yards of concrete was poured in 22 working days. During those days, a cubic yard weighed 4,183 pounds. So on an average day, 3,348,000 pounds of concrete was poured. The dam was completed in December 1911, and on January 28, 1912, hydroelectric power was producing electricity for the region. On top of the Hamilton Bank building in Chattanooga, these words were lit up for the first time in 5-foot letters. It read, Plucky Electrical City, which made the newspapers all over the city. In July of 1916, the Parksville steam plant began production of electricity by means of coal-fired steam plant. In 1949, the steam plant was removed. In 1910, construction began on Ocoee No. 2. Placed about 10 miles upriver, it was in service by 1913. Some of the workers from the No. 1 construction stayed on to work on No. 2. The number 2 powerhouse is a brick structure which sits just beside the Ocoee. The water diverted down the flume falls down through a large pipeline which turns the turbines that generate electricity. This was one of the most unique projects ever undertaken in this part of the country. Upstream, 4.7 miles was built an earthen and stone dam. The diversion dam was 385 feet long and 27.5 feet high. Just as its name indicates, the diversion dam diverted the Ocoee River into a wooden trough called the flume that carried the water to the number 2 hydro plant. If you have never seen the flume, it may be hard to imagine. It is a wooden trough roughly measuring 14 by 10. This trough was 4.7 miles long from the diversion dam to the powerhouse, yet it falls only 17 feet in that distance. The river drops over 250 feet in elevation. The force of the water falling is the secret behind its ability to generate. The flume was built of yellow pine from the forests of Georgia, North Carolina, and Tennessee, using just over 8 million board feet of lumber. In 1910, little heavy equipment was available to carve a 20-foot wide level section almost 5 miles long out of the side of a cliff, on a mountain with a rushing river, sometimes hundreds of feet below. Building of iron trestles for bridges and framing wasn't a simple task either. Mules, wheelbarrows, picks, shovels, dynamites were the tools of the times, manpower being the most important one of them all. The original placing of the timbers was horizontal. In 1944, the flume was reinforced with timbers being placed vertically. In 1976, the flume was condemned, doomed to be gone forever. This is until the historians came along. After several years of maneuvering the Ocean River flume, and number 2 powerhouse was placed on the National Historic Register. Thus, TVA decided to rebuild the flume. Actual construction began in 1982 after several months of construction on test boxes. Late in 1983, water was once again flowing through the Ocoee flume line to produce hydroelectric power. Both the original flume and the modern-day one have trolley-type rail cars on the top of the flume. This provides access for maintenance and inspections. In June 1916, number 2 steam plant was placed online during the early morning hours of April 14, 1949. While tests were being run on Unit 2, Turbine 2, it tripped, which caused it to overspeed. It ripped away from the floor and flew through the wall. The number 2 project established the village of Caney Creek. There was a hotel, tennis court, commissary, a school, church, several houses, and no automobiles. Perhaps nothing was unique about one small village resting against steep mountains along the south side of the Ocoee River, unless you were fortunate enough to live there. It was the policy of Tennessee Power Company to provide housing for its construction personnel, then later the workers at the number 2 powerhouse. Located approximately a fourth of a mile downriver from the powerhouse, on the south side of the river were these homes that boasted indoor plumbing and electricity, refrigerators, electric cook stoves, and bathrooms with hot and cold running water was luxury living for many people at that time. The village had a paved tennis court and a motel for visitors and a commissary for needed items. In the early part of the 1900s, most homes in this area had little to recommend them when it came to so-called modern conveniences. The homes in this village had them. Supplies were brought into the village in 2 ways, usually brought in from the town of Cleveland or Chattanooga. They would be offloaded onto a barge at Parksville number 1 dam, and brought upriver to a dock that had been built just at the headquarters of the lake. Here they were placed on a trolley and brought on into the village. At times they were brought on up the old copper road, now called Highway 64, carried across a swinging bridge and taken into the village. The other swinging bridge on the river was across the diversion dam. It still exists in modern-day version of cable and steel. No modern-day cars or vehicles were ever in the village of Caney Creek. This fact gained them some notoriety. Ripley's, believe it or not, placed it in their facts just for this reason. We'll probably never know all the families that lived in Caney Creek Village. The one-room school was also used as a church. Blanche McClary taught school there for many years. Her students had many fond memories of her. In 1938 to 1939, the Tennessee Valley Authority was to acquire the company that first provided electricity to Knoxville, Chattanooga, Cleveland, Tennessee, and Rome, Georgia. This move saw the families forced to leave the village of Caney Creek and its ultimate destruction. Only a few rock walls and many memories. The war years of the 1940s saw many changes to the Ocoees. A few miles upriver from the diversion dam, a new dam was construction on the Ocoee River. Resting well back from Highway 64, it could hardly be seen unless you knew where to look. This dam diverted water into underground pipelines into Powerhouse Number 3. The Tennessee Valley Authority was formed to control flooding of the Great Tennessee Valley and provide much-needed energy for regional residents. Number 3 was built to help the Great American War Machine. Ocoee Dam Number 3 has a construction that is even different from the first two dams. The dam is upstream of Ocoee Dam Number 2 by over 4 miles and is a concrete dam roughly 110 feet high. Rather than generate electricity at the bottom of the dam, however, they drilled a tunnel through the mountain to reach the powerhouse 4 miles downstream. This allowed the engineers to create even more power by utilizing the elevation drop of the river. At the end of the tunnel is a large pipeline 180 feet above the powerhouse, which releases water for the turbines. The dam and the river in the upper stretch are located in a valley between two major mountains in the area. Big Frog Mountain to the south and Little Frog Mountain to the north. Number 3 was built in 1940 to supply additional power for the area. Manufacturing expansion for World War II. If you haven't seen the dams in person, they're absolutely amazing. I had visited them all myself, more than a handful of times. Some of the pictures is just recently. Thank you for watching and listening. Hope you enjoyed it. Please like and subscribe for more videos.
All of this is research found on the internet.